What are you even doing here? You were uninvited yesterday." The words didn't just hang in the air. They sliced through the heavy, perfumed atmosphere of the Bellamy Estate Chapel like a butcher's knife through silk. The silence that followed was instant and absolute. 300 heads, topped with expensive fascinators and perfectly coiffed hair, swiveled in unison. They weren't looking at the bride, standing there in the $12,000 Vera Wang gown I had paid for. They were looking at me. I could feel the heat rising in my cheeks, the prickly sensation of hundreds of eyes assessing my simple black dress, judging the difficult mother-in-law who couldn't let go. I stood at the back of the sanctuary, clutching my purse so tightly my knuckles turned white, staring down the aisle at my son's bride. Jessica. The woman I had spent the last 6 months loving like a daughter. The woman I had emptied my late husband's life insurance policy to please. She looked angelic, bathed in the soft light filtering through the stained glass, her face a mask of porcelain perfection. But her eyes? Oh darling, her eyes were shards of ice. I smiled at her. It was a sweet smile, the kind I used to give my son when he scraped his knee, but it didn't reach my eyes. My heart was thundering against my ribs like a trapped bird, but I forced my voice to remain steady. "I'm leaving, Jessica," I projected, my voice carrying to the vaulted ceiling. "I just wanted to wish you luck. But first I'd like you to meet my special guest. An old friend of yours." Jessica's brow furrowed in confusion. She looked at Andrew, my son, who looked like a man drowning in confusion. Then I stepped aside. When Jessica saw who stepped out from behind the marble column at the back of the church, the color drained from her face so fast I thought she might faint right there on the altar. She looked like a ghost draped in couture. She took a stumbling step back, her heel catching on the hem of that overpriced dress, and she crumpled to the Italian marble floor. If you are watching this, darling, take a moment to subscribe and let me know where you're watching from in the comments. I imagine you're wondering how a 67-year-old grandmother, a woman who spends her Tuesdays at the garden club and her Sundays in the choir, ended up orchestrating the most spectacular wedding crash in Charleston's history. You're probably wondering how I went from being uninvited to being the only person left standing. Well, pull up a chair and pour yourself something strong. Maybe a hot tea, or perhaps a glass of wine, because I'm going to tell you the truth. And I warn you, it's not a pretty story, but it is a true one. It didn't start in that church. It started 6 months ago, on a Tuesday evening that smelled of rain and jasmine, when my son Andrew brought home the most beautiful liar I had ever met. My name is Margaret Thompson, though everyone who matters calls me Maggie. And until last week, I thought I was planning the wedding of the century for my beloved, only child. I had emptied my savings. I had cashed in bonds that were meant for my own twilight years. I had even borrowed against the house I've lived in for 40 years, the house where I raised Andrew and nursed my husband Robert until his last breath. I did it all to give Andrew and Jessica the fairy tale she claimed to have dreamed about since she was a little girl. The venue was the Bellamy Estate, a place with sprawling gardens and that distinct antebellum charm that screams old money, even if the money paying for it was very new and rapidly disappearing. The flowers alone, 2,000 white roses flown in from Ecuador, cost more than my first car. I paid for every last petal. Why? Because Jessica's family, as she had tearfully explained over a cup of chamomile tea in my kitchen, had disowned her for marrying beneath her social status. My heart, foolish and soft as it was, bled for this poor girl. She told me she had given up her inheritance for love, for my Andrew. I remember the first time she told me that story. We were sitting on my back porch, watching the fireflies dance in the twilight. She reached across the table and took my hand, her skin cool and soft against my weathered fingers. "Oh, Mrs. Thompson," she had whispered, her large, doe-like eyes glistening with unshed tears. "My parents. They don't understand love like we do. They think money is everything. But I would give up every cent just to be part of a family like yours. You are like the mother I never had." What a performance. It deserves an Oscar, truly. It wasn't just the words. It was the way her chin trembled, the way she looked at me with such desperate hope. I fell for it hook, line, and sinker. I squeezed her hand back, feeling a surge of protective instinct I hadn't felt since Andrew was a toddler. "You are family now," I had told her. "And we take care of our own." Andrew was completely besotted, and looking back I understand why. Jessica was stunning in that effortless way that makes other women feel invisible. She had spun gold hair and eyes that could make a grown man forget his own name, let alone his common sense. She told us she worked as a pediatric nurse, that she spent her days caring for sick children, and her weekends volunteering at animal shelters. She spoke about wanting children with such genuine longing that I found myself daydreaming about grandchildren, imagining little feet pattering across my hardwood floors again. I was so ready to be a grandmother. I was so ready to fill the silence that had settled over my house since Robert passed away 3 years ago. Grief is a heavy coat, my dears, and Jessica seemed to help me take it off, piece by piece. But you know, a mother's intuition is a strange and powerful thing. It's a quiet alarm that rings in the back of your mind, even when everything looks perfect. It's that feeling you get when the weather changes before the storm actually breaks. Something nagged at me. A whisper of doubt I couldn't quite silence. Started with small things. Inconsistencies. One afternoon, while we were looking at wedding invitations, she mentioned growing up riding horses in Connecticut. A week later, over dinner, she told a funny story about learning to drive a tractor on her uncle's farm in Nebraska. When I asked about it, she laughed it off, saying they moved around a lot because of her father's business. Then there was the money. She always paid cash. Always. We went dress shopping. A magical day, or so I thought, and when we found the one, a $12,000 masterpiece of lace and silk, she pulled a thick roll of $100 bills from her purse. "I'm old-fashioned," she giggled, seeing my eyebrows raise. "I don't believe in credit cards. My father always said, if you can't pay for it, you don't own it." At the time I thought it was quirky, admirable even. Who in their 20s is old-fashioned about debt? But looking back, I realize how careful she was. No paper trail. No credit checks. No digital footprint. Still, Andrew was happier than I had seen him in years. His face lit up whenever she walked into the room. He walked taller. He laughed louder. And for a mother, seeing your child happy is a drug. You will ignore a lot of red flags just to keep that smile on their face. The revelation came accidentally, as the most devastating truths often do. It was a Tuesday 2 weeks before the wedding. The house was full of boxes, wedding favors, hand-painted chocolates that had cost a fortune, ribbon, tulle. I was dropping off a batch at Andrew's apartment. I had a key, of course. I let myself in quietly, balancing 3 boxes in my arms, not wanting to disturb them if they were resting. I heard Jessica's voice coming from the bedroom. It was low, urgent, and lacked that sugary sweetness I was used to. "Marcus, I told you not to call me on this number," she hissed. I froze in the hallway. The tone was sharp, jagged. This wasn't the soft-spoken girl who cried over abandoned puppies. This was a woman with ice in her veins. "No, the wedding is still on schedule," she said, sounding annoyed. "Yes, I'll have access to his accounts after we're married." "What do you mean you want a bigger cut?" "We agreed on 30%. My blood turned to absolute ice. I felt the cold seep into my bones, a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. I gripped the box of chocolates so hard the cardboard buckled under my fingers. "Look, the old lady has already given us over 40 grand, she continued, her voice dripping with disdain. "And she'll probably gift us more money for the house down payment after the wedding. She's selling bonds, Marcus. She's liquidating everything." I stopped breathing. The old lady. That's what I was. Not Mom, not Margaret, not the mother she never had. Just the old lady. The mark. "This mark is worth at least 200,000, maybe more," she said. "No, he doesn't suspect anything. He's completely hooked. He's a total mama's boy. Easy to manipulate. All I have to do is cry about my disapproving parents and he hands over the credit card." I had heard enough. I crept backward toward the front door, my legs shaking so violently I thought I might collapse. I managed to leave quietly, closing the door with a soft click that sounded like a gunshot to my own ears. Once I was in my car, I didn't start the engine. I just sat there. I looked at my hands resting on the steering wheel. Hands that had changed diapers, planted gardens, held my husband's hand as he died. Hands that had written check after check for this woman. I started to shake. Not with fear, but with a rage so hot it felt like it could melt the dashboard. I wasn't just a victim. I was a participant. I had handed her the knife she was using to gut my family. I drove 3 blocks away and pulled into a pharmacy parking lot because I was hyperventilating. I sat there for an hour crying angry hot tears. I felt like the world's biggest fool. How could I have been so blind? How could I have let this predator into our lives? But then as the sun began to set over Charleston, painting the sky in bruises of purple and red, something shifted inside me. The tears stopped. A cold, hard resolve took their place. It was a feeling I hadn't felt since I fought for my husband's life during his cancer battle. If Jessica Miller thought she could destroy my son, steal our legacy, and laugh about it to some man named Marcus, she had picked the wrong family to mess with. I wiped my face. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. My eyes were red, but the woman staring back at me wasn't broken. She was waking up. "Okay, Margaret," I said aloud to the empty car. "Stop crying. Start planning. I needed proof. Real, undeniable evidence. Andrew is stubborn just like his father was. He has a heart of gold, but he's proud. If I went to him with just hearsay, Sarah or Jessica or whatever her name was would spin it. She would cry. She would accuse me of jealousy. She would say I was a bitter old woman trying to ruin his happiness. And he might believe her. I needed something nuclear. I drove straight home and did something I never thought I would do in my lifetime. I opened my laptop and Googled Private Investigators, Charleston, South Carolina. The next morning, I met with Patricia Hayes at a small out-of-the-way cafe downtown. Patricia was a former police detective who had gone private after retiring. She specialized in fraud cases. She was a woman cut from granite, probably 10 years younger than me, with sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing and a no-nonsense demeanor that immediately put me at ease. "Mrs. Thompson," she said, after I had poured out the entire sordid story, trying to keep my voice from trembling. "What you are describing sounds like a classic romance scam with a marriage twist. These people are professionals. They study their targets. They learn what they want to hear, what they are missing in their lives, usually family, connection, validation, and they become exactly that person." I felt a fresh wave of shame. "She knew I was lonely," I whispered. "She knew I wanted grandchildren." "That's how they work," Patricia said gently. "Don't blame yourself for having a good heart, Margaret. Blame her for exploiting it." I slid a check across the table. It was a lot of money, but at this point I was fighting for my son's life. "How long will it take?" Patricia looked at the check, then at me. She smiled grimly. "For someone stupid enough to use her real voice on the phone? Not long at all. The Marcus she was talking to is likely a handler or a past partner she's trying to cut out. If there is discord among thieves, we can use it." 2 weeks later, just 4 days before the wedding, Patricia called me. I was in my garden, deadheading the roses, pretending everything was normal. "Margaret," her voice was grave, "you're going to want to sit down for this." I sat on the stone bench near the fountain. "Tell me." "Jessica Miller doesn't exist," Patricia said. "The woman your son is planning to marry is actually Sarah Collins. And she has quite a history. Originally from Tampa, 29 years old. She's been arrested 3 times in the past 5 years for fraud, though she's only been convicted once. She works with partners, usually men who help her research targets." My heart sank. "And Marcus?" "Marcus Rivera," Patricia confirmed. "Her most frequent accomplice. They were romantically involved until about 2 years ago. But here's the interesting part, Margaret. She scammed him too. Apparently, she took off with $15,000 of their earnings and disappeared. He's been trying to track her down ever since. So she's running from her own partner," I said, the pieces clicking together. "That's why she was arguing with him on the phone. She's trying to pay him off with my money." "Exactly," Patricia said. "I've located him. He's living in Atlanta now, working construction under the table." I looked at the roses in front of me. Beautiful, thorny, dangerous. A plan began to form in my mind. A plan so bold, so theatrical it scared me. But I didn't have a choice. "Patricia," I said, my voice steadying, "I need you to give me Marcus Rivera's phone number." There was a pause on the line. "Margaret, what are you thinking?" "I'm thinking," I said, "that a man who has been hunting Sarah for 2 years might be very interested in attending her wedding. And I'm thinking that if anyone can expose a con artist, it's another con artist." "You want to bring the wolf to the wedding?" Patricia sounded impressed. I want to burn the whole house of cards down, I said. Can you get me the number? Check your email. I called Marcus Rivera that afternoon. He answered on the third ring, his voice rough and suspicious. Yeah, Mr. Rivera, I said, channeling every ounce of Southern matriarch authority I possessed. My name is Margaret Thompson. I believe you know my son's fiancée, though you knew her as Sarah Collins. The silence on the other end was heavy. Then, where is she? She's about to marry my son in Charleston in 3 days, I said. She has stolen over $40,000 from us already. And from what I overheard, she's planning to steal a lot more. You overheard? I heard her talking to you, I said. About the old lady and the mama's boy. About the cut you were demanding. Listen, lady. He started, defensive. No, you listen, I interrupted. She told you she'd pay you after the wedding, didn't she? Well, I'm here to tell you she's planning to disappear again. She's setting up offshore accounts. You're never going to see a dime. A string of curses exploded on the other end of the line. I waited until he was finished. But, I said, I can offer you something better than money. I can offer you revenge. What do you want? He asked, his voice low. I want you to come to the wedding, I said. I want you to walk into that church and tell everyone exactly who she is. I want you to bring proof. Photos, texts, whatever you have. Why would I do that? Because if you don't, she wins, I said. She gets the money, she gets the guy, and she laughs at you forever. But if you come, you get to watch her world fall apart. And I promise you, Mr. Rivera, I will make sure the police are there to pick up the pieces. There was a long silence. Then a dark chuckle. You're a scary lady, Mrs. Thompson. I'm a mother, I said. Same difference. We made the arrangements. Marcus would drive down Saturday morning. I would get him into the church. But first I had to ensure the stage was set. I had to make Sarah feel safe. I had to make her think she had one. 3 days before the wedding, I started pulling the strings. I called the event coordinator at Bellamy Estates. Mrs. Sullivan, this is Margaret Thompson. There's been a change in the payment arrangement. The bride's family has decided to cover the final balance after all. Oh, how lovely, the coordinator chirped. It's wonderful when families reconcile. Yes, I said, my voice dripping with grandmotherly warmth. So please hold off on processing any payments from my account. The Millers will be handling everything directly. In fact, they are very particular. Do not charge my card. I gave her the fake number Patricia had found, the burner phone Sarah used for vendors. I did the same with the florist, the caterer, the photographer. By Saturday morning, every vendor in Charleston would be looking for payment from a family that didn't exist. But the hardest part, the part that nearly broke me, was the call to Andrew. I called him on Thursday night. Mom. He sounded so tired when he answered. I really can't talk right now. Jessica is really stressed. She feels like you're judging her. Andrew, sweetheart, I said, forcing my voice to remain light, though tears were stinging my eyes. I completely understand Jessica's feelings. In fact, I've been doing some thinking. I realize I may have been a bit overbearing. Silence. He hadn't expected that. Really, this is Jessica's day, I continued. And if she feels my presence would be stressful, then I should respect that. So I've decided. I'm not coming to the wedding. What? Andrew sounded shocked. Mom, you can't. You have to be there. No, I said firmly. I'm going to take a little trip this weekend. Drive up to Savannah. Do some antiquing. I want you two to have your special day without any family drama. I just want you to be happy, Andrew. Mom, his voice cracked. Are you sure? Jessica might change her mind if... No, darling. I cut him off gently. I think it's for the best. I love you too much to be the cloud over your sunshine. Hanging up that phone was physically painful. He sounded so relieved. That relief was a knife in my heart. He truly believed I was the problem. He truly believed that by removing me, he was saving his happiness. Little did he know I was the only one fighting for it. Friday evening, Sarah called me herself. Mrs. Thompson, it's Jessica, she said, her voice sugar-sweet. I wanted to thank you for being so understanding. I know it might seem harsh, but... Not at all, dear. I said, matching her tone perfectly. A bride should feel comfortable. I'm just packing for Savannah now. Well, I hope you have a wonderful time, she said. And after we get settled, maybe we can have lunch. I'd really like for us to be friends. The audacity. She was gloating. She thought she had successfully exiled me. She thought the coast was clear to rob my son blind. That sounds lovely, Jessica, I said. We will have so much to talk about. Saturday morning arrived gray and drizzly. The kind of weather brides cry over, but I found it fitting. I woke up at 5 a.m. unable to sleep. I dressed in a simple black dress. Not mourning but serious. Dignified. And around my neck I placed my grandmother's pearls. The real ones. I had given Sarah a replica a week ago, claiming they were the heirlooms. She didn't know the difference. She didn't know the weight of history. At 9 a.m. Marcus called. I'm here, Mrs. Thompson. You sure about this? I've never been more sure of anything, I said. What if your son doesn't forgive you? The question hung in the air. I looked at the photo of Andrew on my dresser, my sweet trusting boy. Then I'll have saved him from a monster, I said softly. Sometimes love means being the villain in the story until they are ready to see the truth. I arrived at the estate at 1 p.m., slipping in through the catering entrance. The place was in chaos. The florist was arguing with the coordinator about a declined credit card. The caterer was frantically trying to reach the Miller family. I walked past them like a ghost, unnoticed in the panic. I positioned myself behind a marble column in the back of the chapel, a vantage point where I could see everything. At 2 p.m. the music started. The wedding march. The doors opened and Sarah Collins, playing Jessica Miller for the last time, began her walk down the aisle. She looked radiant, I'll give her that. She was smiling, clutching a bouquet of white roses that hadn't been paid for, walking toward my son who looked at her with such pure, unguarded love it made my chest ache. I waited. I waited until she was halfway down the aisle, until everyone was looking at her, until the moment was perfect. Then I stepped out. What are you even doing here? You were uninvited yesterday. The shock on her face was worth every penny I had spent. But the real show was about to begin. I'm leaving, Jessica, I said, seeing the confusion ripple through the crowd. But first, meet my special guest. I nodded to the side door. Marcus walked in. He wasn't wearing a tuxedo. He was wearing a rumpled suit and a look of pure fury. He held a manila folder in his hand like a weapon. Sarah Collins, his voice boomed, bouncing off the vaulted ceiling. Did you really think you could hide forever? Sarah froze. The bouquet slipped from her fingers and hit the floor with a soft thud. Andrew stepped forward, confused, protective. Sir? I think you have the wrong person. This is Jessica. Marcus marched down the aisle, ignoring the gasps of the guests. Jessica? He laughed, a harsh barking sound. Is that what she's calling herself now? He reached into his jacket and pulled out a stack of photos, throwing them onto the marble floor at her feet. They fanned out like a deck of cards. Here she is in Miami running a credit card scam, Marcus shouted, pointing. Here she is in Birmingham, posing as a cancer patient to steal from a church fund. And here she is leaving our hotel room in Memphis with my wallet, my watch, and the engagement ring I was stupid enough to buy her. Andrew looked down at the photos. I saw him squint, saw his brain trying to reject what his eyes were seeing. Jessica? What is this? He's lying, she screamed, her voice shrill and desperate. She grabbed Andrew's arm, her nails digging into his suit. Andrew, I don't know this man. He's crazy. Your mother hired him. Did she? Marcus asked. He pulled out his phone. Because I have a recording from 3 weeks ago. Want to hear what she calls you? He hit play. He held the phone up to the microphone on the lectern. The sound filled the church. The old lady has already given us 40 grand. She's so desperate for grandchildren she'll believe anything. And the son? A complete mama's boy. All I have to do is cry about my tragic past and he writes another check. The silence in the chapel was absolute. It was a physical weight pressing down on all of us. I watched my son's face crumble. The color drained from his skin, leaving him gray. The realization, the betrayal, it washed over him in waves. He pulled his arm away from her as if she burned him. You called my mother a lonely old bat. he whispered, his voice trembling. Andrew, no, it's out of context. Sarah pleaded, tears streaming down her face now, real tears, tears of panic. Context. Andrew's voice rose, stronger now. My mother gave us everything. She emptied her savings. She treated you like a daughter. And you? You were laughing at her. Sarah looked around wildly. She saw the guests recording on their phones. She saw the minister backing away. And then she saw me. You, she hissed, pointing a shaking finger at me. You did this. You ruined everything. I didn't ruin anything, Sarah, I said, walking slowly down the aisle, my head held high. I just turned on the lights. She's jealous, Andrew. Sarah screamed, desperate now. She wants to control you. She can't stand that you love me more than her. It was a desperate throw, playing on every insecurity Andrew had. But Marcus wasn't done. Actually, Marcus said, checking his watch, the show isn't over. He looked toward the back of the church. Gentlemen. 2 men in dark suits stepped through the doors. FBI. Patricia had really come through. They moved with the swift, silent purpose of predators. Sarah Collins, one of them said, holding up a badge. You are under arrest for fraud, identity theft, and wire fraud. The scene that followed was pure chaos. Sarah screaming as she was handcuffed in her $12,000 dress. Guests standing on pews to get a better view. Phones flashing. Andrew standing alone at the altar, looking like a man who had survived a bomb blast. When they dragged her out, kicking and screaming obscenities that would make a sailor blush, the silence that followed was deafening. Andrew looked at me. He looked at the empty spot where his bride had stood. Then he looked at the congregation. He took a deep breath. Well, he said, his voice cracking slightly but audible to everyone. This is awkward. A nervous titter ran through the crowd. The wedding is obviously cancelled, Andrew said, running a hand through his hair. But the reception is paid for. The open bar is paid for. So if anyone wants a drink, God knows I could use one. Later, at the reception that wasn't a reception, the atmosphere was strange. Relieved. Hysterical. People were drinking the expensive wine and eating the lobster, telling stories about the wedding of the century. Andrew found me on the terrace. He held 2 glasses of champagne. He looked tired, older than he had that morning, but his eyes were clear. Mom, he said, handing me a glass. Andrew. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the pearl necklace I had given Sarah, the fake one. He tossed it onto the table. It made a hollow plastic sound. She didn't even notice they were fake, did she? No, I said. She didn't know the weight of real pearls. She didn't know the weight of real love. I'm sorry, Andrew said, his voice thick with emotion. He leaned against the railing, looking out at the gardens. For not believing you. For choosing her over you. I feel like such an idiot. How could I be so blind? I put my hand on his arm. You weren't an idiot, sweetheart. You were in love. And love makes us vulnerable. It opens our ribcage and exposes our heart. She was a professional. She targeted you. She targeted us. He looked at me with a newfound respect, a mixture of awe and fear. You know you're terrifying, right? The FBI? The ex-boyfriend? How did you pull that off? I smiled, sipping my champagne. The bubbles tasted like victory. Never underestimate a Thompson woman, Andrew. We fight for our own. And I would burn the world down to keep you safe. We stood there for a long time, watching the sun set over the gardens. The guests were inside, dancing to the band that was paid for, celebrating the disaster. But out here it was just a mother and her son, standing in the wreckage but standing together. I learned something that day, and I hope you learn it too. Sometimes the hardest thing you will ever do is watch your children make mistakes. But when the mistake is a predator in a white dress, you don't just watch. You sharpen your claws. You protect your pack. And you remind the world that a grandmother's love is not soft. It is fierce, it is relentless, and it is the most powerful force on earth. And as for me, I'm doing just fine. The money is gone, yes. The savings are depleted. But I have my son back. I have my dignity. And I have a story that will keep the Garden Club entertained for the next 20 years. So my dears, if you've ever had to fight for someone you love, even when they didn't want you to, tell me in the comments. Have you ever had to be the villain to be the hero? I'd love to hear your story. And remember, no matter how old you are, or how invisible the world tries to make you feel, you are powerful, you are wise, and you are never ever to be messed with. Take care of yourselves, and never let anyone steal your pearls.